right, we'll do it live. I'll write it.
Do it
We'll do it
live.
live. Right, welcome to Warcraft Logs. If you guys are not familiar with this site, right, I encourage you to go out to the website and play around with it. I'm going to talk you through some things. I am not a member, right? So all these things that I'm going to go through doesn't require you to sign up or log in, or you can create an account if you want. But I'm sticking to just anybody can go out to this and access this. There's a
This is
couple.
the this
One
is the
second, real quick.
logs, right?
Yeah, these are the logs. If everybody can, please, not you, Mom, about you're fine to keep talking. If everybody can mute their mic until they need to speak, just so we can keep out background noise, that would be great, please.
Yeah, and I'll leave some time for questions at the end, right? So
Right, but
we'll questions.
some things, if we don't ask on the way, we aren't going to do well. Like my memory. So I guess I thought you would start with, and I'm just trying to understand if we're going to go there, but like when Scotty posts a log, that's when I click on to get to where I'm going.
Yeah, we can get there, right? So this is just let's start here. I'll get to
Okay,
I'll
that's
get to
fine.
that.
That's right.
Basically, it is a program that you can put into your battle logs that will track some information during raid encounters and during Mythic Plus. I'm going to focus on raid. I don't particularly like the Mythic Plus information. It doesn't. It kind of is all encompassing. It's not specific to like bosses and things like that. Whereas the raid can give you a little bit more information. So I'm going to focus there.
Okay.
If you're not familiar with this, right? So this is kind of what it looks like when you go out to the website. Um, now my website froze. Here we go. Let me refresh it. Sorry. There we go. Okay, now it moves. That's good. So there's a couple things, right? So there is a little drop down menu up here that you can search, specific encounters, and I'll kind of talk through this. Here's your Mythic Plus dungeons, right? So you can look at rankings and statistics, but um, I don't particularly like logs for this, just because it's kind of all encompassing. It gives you an overview of the dungeon as a whole without, but not specific to encounters like what the raid does, which is why I kind of prefer the raid. So we'll focus on the current tier. So a couple things for me, right, when I'm going out to research a fight, trying to figure out, min-maxing pieces and things like that. You can go out to rankings, right? You can search. Um, sorry, it's going to take a little bit here. There we go. You can search particular classes, right? So, the classes, and then it'll break down by each spec. Okay. So if you want to know, for your particular class, which specs are good for which fight, right? So this will kind of give you that information, right? So you can look at the top logs and see, okay, maybe Affliction is good for this fight, and why is it good? Maybe, Destro is good for this fight. So once it loads up, I'll show you. Okay. Processing, please wait. I guess logs.
Did you stop talking? Hello?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just waiting for this to load up. I don't know why it's
That's
being
okay. I
slow
was trying
tonight.
to find the mute on my thing, and I don't know where it's at. And I
There
pressed
we
my.
go. There we
Oh,
go.
it was.
Okay. So this will kind of give you can look at top 10, you can look at top 50. You can go into the specific encounter. I'm not going to click it, but it'll show you the top, 100, 200, and you can kind of go through. But if you look at this, right, so this will kind of tell you, which spec seems to be the best for each fight, right? So, in my viewpoint, if the top, 30 players are using this spec for this fight, then something's probably up, right, where it might be really good for that fight. So if you kind of, scroll down, right, so in Azoth, and also what it tells you is the talents, right? So what talents are good for the fight, right? So you can see which talent this person does for this specific fight. right? How much DPS they did, and this is kind of relative, right? So don't expect just because you take all these talents, all these Azerite essences and all that stuff that you're going to pull this. Some of it has to do with duration and things like that, and I'll kind of talk through that a little bit. How quickly they kill the boss and things like that has a factor into the high damage. But overall, right? So this is kind of where you can look at, okay, well, what build do I want to take in, right? So it'll give you, the talents that the top players are using, right? So and also the trinkets they're using, right? You may not have these trinkets, so you might have to find something to sub, but if you want to grind, for the best in slot trinkets, chances are these are it, right? So, you know, if the top 30 players are using these trinkets, then most likely these are the best in slot, right? You don't need to sim it. You don't have to sim it, right? They probably simmed it and said it was the best in slot, but if they're using it, right, it means it's good for this fight. And it'll also tell you the Azerite traits, right? So what Azerite traits are best? And also, the essences, right? So right now, and I imagine that when we get to Shadowlands, Soulbinds will have a play in here, right? Soulbind builds for particular classes for fights and things like that kind of help you, what do I take, right? So you're pushing higher end content, right? So logs will kind of give you a basis on what to bring to the fight. It also tell you the essences, right? So, right now essences are pretty stupid, but you can see, what essences are the best for these particular fights. So, for Destro, since I'm Destro, expedient with some infinite stars is probably good for single target. Whereas like Skitra, more likely the expedient is good because it's not really a single target fight, right? So there's some AOE in there, but this kind of gives you, kind of helps you what builds, right? What specs are good for the fight. Obviously, right now we're at the end of an X pack, so grinding these things out, grinding these trinkets out, grinding out the essences that you need that are best is probably going to be a little challenging in an uphill battle. So you could kind of get close, but for the next tier, right, this will kind of give you that, right? So okay, if we're hitting a wall in a fight or a boss fight, right, maybe I'm going to come out here and look at some talent to see what some others are taking, right? Are they, am I taking the best talents I can bring, right? Maybe there's some things that are situational, for that particular fight, that gives you an edge, right? So this is kind of where you can go out and see that information, right? So um, so this is important, right, to kind of help you min max, for your class, right? If you want to play one spec, that's fine. You can go out here, you can search specific to that spec, um, and it'll take away everything else and it'll only show that spec, right? So it'll only tell you, like the top 10, but you can go into this particular one and it'll tell you, it tells you the top talents, right? The top trinkets, the top Azerite powers, right? So this is an average across the board, the top essences for the fight. And it does it for everything, right? So, I mean, this is a good, guide, if you're not sure where to go to find, well, what do I get? What do I do, right? What do I need to go after, right? This will kind of tell you. And you can go into specific players and you can see what they're bringing, right? So here's their gear. Most of the time these guys are probably best in slot at this point, right? Even when they're working for the tier, right? So you can see, all the essences they're bringing, Azerite powers, the talents they're bringing, what gear they're bringing. The blues are dungeon gear, so most likely it's Mythic Plus. It won't show purple, so just keep that in mind. But you can look and see what gear they bring without, going out and simming shit to death, right? I'm not a big sim guy. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, but I don't like to overly sim things. I kind of use logs to kind of help me min max and kind of help me guide on, what kinds of things I need to go after. Um, and then, the focus is on, min maxing your character and getting the most out of what you got, right? Because that's the key. Gear will come over time, but if you're not maximizing your damage based on what you got, then you're doing something wrong. So the next thing I want to show you guys, so you can search yourself, right? So, you know, um, if you don't have this, you can download WarcraftLogs and you can put it You can tie it to your Blizzard account. I forget all the steps to do it, but it'll tell you how to do it. You can run logs for yourself at any time. You can keep it personal. Fizz does it in raids, and I'll show you where he sticks that. But if you want to search for yourself, you can. So this is me. And it'll kind of give you an overview on how well you did for the fights, right? So, over the past, month, 2 months that we've been rating, right? This is kind of, the progress on, how well you did. These percentages are percentiles, comparing you to other people that are the same class as you for this particular fight, compares to other logs. Kind of gives you some ranking. Yeah, there's some prestige in here, and people game this stuff to try to get on the top 10, right? But kind of gives you your average on heroic, your median, how many kills you've had. But so what you want to do, right? So when we go in and we start progressing on fights, you kind of want to be here in the blue. Um, if you want to push content, right, at a reasonable pace, right? Yeah, maybe we're not world first, but if we want to push, to kill things quicker, this is what you want to shoot for, right? And it's going to be relative, right? So everybody's going to be kind of on the same, you know, keel when we go into Shadowlands and raid Castle Narathia, right? So everybody's going to be around the same item level, right? There's going to be some players that are better than you, some players that are worse than you. But this is kind of where you want to shoot for, right? So, I did something wrong here, probably didn't maximize things. So I need to go and look at that and find out, what could I have done better? You can always look at that to see what you do better, but you kind of want to be on the blue, right? Purple's nice. It's great. Some magic things may need to happen for you to get there. And time, to kill plays a factor in it too.
Quick
Um,
question while you're here.
yeah,
You said, like on Hive Mind, where you said you didn't do as good as you should have or something. And you said, so I can go in and look at that. How would you go in and look at that particular one?
I'll get there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, I'll get there. Don't worry. But yeah, I mean, so, this is important, right? So how well am I doing? What's my DPS like? Am I doing good DPS? Am I doing bad DPS? If you're not pushing the blues, you want to find, you want to go back to the drawing board to see what you can do better. Some of it's positioning, some of it could be, just your rotation. Some of it could be, decision making, right? Am I making the right decision at the time? Um, and depending on the class, but I'll focus on Warlock because that's what I play. So I'll kind of pause there, and I'll get into the specifics around what could I have done better. But are there any questions so far? Um, you kind of want me to restate or redo? If not, I'll kind of continue on. All right, hearing none. So since Mama had the question, right? Um, So these are, so you can go into the specific fight, right? Here's kind of where the, um, you know, what you need to do to get to those breakpoints, right? So, for Hive Mind, right? To get to, the blue Parse breakpoints, right? So it goes up over time because people get gears, right? I kind of need to be at, 79K. So I'm kind of there, right? So you see the little dots, right? It'll tell you kind of where you fall amongst the breakpoints. So I'm kind of there, close. And then what do I need to do to get to the purple percentile, right? What do I need to do to get to the 95th percentile, right? What do I need to do to get the 99th percentile, right? And these sometimes are unobtainable, right? For what we're trying to do, right? If you're looking for world first and things like that, like you're probably going to want to be up and around these ranges, right? Because you're grinding the right gear, right? You're spending a lot of time making sure you're maximized as far as like what your best in slot is, and you got 19 other people doing the same thing. So that kind of, that helps. But, if you could get to this, midpoint here, or this, percentile here, is really what you want to shoot for. Okay. And then you can click the DPS and it'll take you to the log, right? So, here's the damage done, right? It compares you to everybody else that did some damage in the raid, right? It'll tell you, what your parse is percentile wise, and it'll tell you what your parse is based on your item level, right? So, for players coming back to the expansion or catching up, this will kind of help you gauge as far as like how well you're doing compared to other players at the same eye level, right? So, maybe everybody's at, say 460, but you're still at 440, right? And you're trying to catch up. We're bringing some boss kills. This will kind of give you, how you stack up against other players at the same item level, right? So, maybe because everybody's parsing at, 460, right? So you may not get a blue here, but if you're getting blue here, right, you're on the right path, right? So eventually you'll get gear and you'll get up there. But consider both things, right? And it's kind of hard now because we're so late at the end of the X pack. This is kind of where you want to be. Um, so this is just kind of a summary, right? It'll tell you overall fight, um, you know, damage taken by ability, and this is overall healing done, right? So it stacks up the healers against each other on how much they've healed over the course of the fight. You can see, you can look at what players are bringing to the fight, right? So here's the tanks, here's all their gear, here's their talents, Azerite traits, essences, corruption, right? So if you're looking to, you know, maybe heal and see what other people are doing, you can do it here. Move that. This is a graph, right? So this is kind of the damage done over the course of time. So if you notice this little blue box here, this is when we popped Time Warp or Bloodlust or Hero, whatever you want to call it, right? So, there's a huge damage spike and then it kind of goes down, and then this is kind of, you could see the peaks and valleys of the damage, throughout the fight. Here is the damage taken, over the course of the fight. There might be spikes here, if and here, depending on what's coming out, right? So if you're a healer, right, this is important, right? So you could kind of look at this and see, okay, hey, there's a huge damage spike here. Maybe, I need to look at that and pop a ray cooldown, right? So maybe tranquility, maybe, to kind of smooth that out. Maybe there's a large burst of damage that I didn't realize from an ability that, can kind of help me smooth out that damage. So I'm not like, spamming heals as much as I can, or people are dying. And same with, everybody else, right? So it's not just healers, it's, the raid too, right? So maybe I need to save my personal cooldowns for this particular spot because, okay, this is where the most damage is coming out. And this is everything, right? So some of this could be avoidable. Some of it might not be, right? So we can look at that too. And then you can see the healing done right throughout the fight. It's pretty level for the damage, right? So it's pretty good, right? To where they're nothing. These two lines aren't separated by a lot, to where hey, there's some overhealing here, or there's not enough healing here. You don't want these two so separated that okay, then something might need to be looked at further to see, okay, why are we not given enough heals, or why is the damage so much that we can't keep up? You can go into your particular player, right? So this is everything, right? So this is just me, okay? So you can see, my damage spiking here because of Time Warp. You can see, my damage spiking here, lining up with my cooldowns and things like that. The longer the fight drags on, the less damage you're going to do. It's just inevitable, right? So people killing, the fight in a minute and 30 or 2 minutes, right? They're going to have higher DPS because of this, right? So, when you're spiking here and then you slowly damage, you have the damage fall off from when Time Warp expires, right? So eventually you'll kind of get down here. You want to try to make this as even as, oh, I'm sorry. Let's go back. I didn't mean to do that. That's fine. We can work with it. So you want to make sure, these peaks and valleys aren't as, big, right? You try to want to have an even amount of damage, but you're still going to have some peaks and valleys, right? If you have too many valleys, right? So if you go, let me go back to, let me just click out of that. Let's go back in here. Oh. No. Let me get rid of, I don't know what I did here. Let's just refresh it. Yep, that don't work. Oh well. Let me just go back. Okay, but I'm not sure why it's showing this. I have to figure out why it's doing that. But for the sake of this, you don't want to have like huge valleys, right? So, if you have huge valleys, right, that means probably you're not, you know, maximizing your ABC, always be casting, right? Maybe if you're melee, you're getting out of range of, your melee strikes and things like that. If you're range, maybe you're not looking at your movement as well. Things like that to help you. Now, to see, to kind of see what. Let me go back here. Let me see if I can share. See if I can do a side by side. Give me 1 second. Oops, sorry. Let me just share screen. Let's see. It may not let me do a side by side, but normally what I would do, I don't know if you're going to be able to see the side by side, but you can do a side by side to some other players too, right? To see, some of it. So some of it might be, am I doing enough chaos bolts, right? So, am I casting enough chaos bolts? Am I shard capping, right? It could be that I'm shard capping. Let me see if resources will tell me. No, not. But so for a warlock, soul shards are my resource, right? As well as mana, but mana is not really a thing. It's there, right? As long as I'm casting something and I'm not doing other things, I'm not going to run out of mana. But soul shards is a thing that I have to track, because it's my chaos bolts, right? So if I'm shard capping, if I'm getting too many shards and I'm not casting enough chaos bolts, that's a DPS loss. That could be room for improvement. If I am, let's see, if I'm not, if my immolate isn't up, right? So, immolate is my dot, right? So if I'm not maximizing the uptime on my immolate, I'm going to lose shard generation, right? This is DPS loss. Conflagrate, incinerate, psychic shredders a cooldown or a trinket, so you're not really going to be able to control that a little bit. But these things I can control, right? Incinerates, chaos bolts. So yeah, there's something funky going on here. But yeah, I mean, so this is kind of where I would look to see, how to increase my damage, right? So, if and then you can also look at cast, right? So uh, let's look at a different encounter. Let's come out. Let's see. So this is a pretty cool thing too. This will help you with that as well. So events will kind of give you, if you go to your specific person, right? Events will kind of give you the time frame of when you cast stuff, right? So, most of us have some type of opener, right? Where we're, popping everything at the, all at once. We're doing, the spells we need to do, and then you can look at the time frame on how quickly you're doing it. Some of it's tied to haste. Some of it might be tied to player ability, right? So, spending some time with the dummy to look at your optimal opener and working on it, right, to where it becomes something that you can do rather consistently. And you can see, in this section, like, how much time is passed in between those types of things. So, if I had, a large gap of time between my conflags, my infernals, and then, my chaos bolts, right? This will kind of help you with that. Each class has some different openers, right, on what they need to do in the first like 20 seconds of a fight. So you could kind of look at that to see, to make sure that you're using that time optimally. Usually it's tied to bloodlust for, or time warp, right? So, you know, maximizing your damage in time warp is really important, because you want to line up your cooldowns with time warp. You want to, make sure you're doing as much as you can during time warp, because that's when your optimal damage is, right? Because of the haste buff from time warp. It used to be, there used to be like trinkets that you can use. They would proc at the beginning of a fight, and that had some effect on it. Now it's not so much anymore. So on-use trinkets are a little bit more important. Making sure that you line those on-use trinkets up with your cooldowns and things like that. And I think I can have to show that. Let me find it. I forget how to get there. Let me see. Dispels. So damage done is important. Let me get back to the tables. So damage done is really important, right? You can see, here how I peaked. And that's because, I'm lining up my infernal, my cooldowns in this particular window to maximize damage. Potions, you want to pre-pot right at the beginning of a fight. You can see I spiked there because of that. And then you want to make sure you save a pot for time warp. Um, and it'll be dependent, right? So there may be times where we need to pop it to get through a certain break point in the fight. There might be like we might be under geared to where, if we're not pushing enough damage in that particular phase to get to the next phase, or um, you know, ads are staying up longer than they should to get to some other part of the fight. We may look at moving time warp, or, pop in a potion. But, just for particular fights in general, right? Just an overall rule, right? You want to pre-pot, and then you want to pot during time warp as well. And we'll call time warp, and then, during the fights, you'll know when it's coming. We'll kind of talk about it a little bit before the fights. You can kind of plan, and this is kind of where knowing the fight's important to, plan to know when we're going to pop it for this. So and then, these are all kind of all the things that, did damage to him, right? So here, immolates uptime, right? For your most classes have some type of dot. You want those dot to be above, I would say 95%. Sometimes you can't always do that because boss have some like immune phases and things like that, to where, dots will drop off. But, over the course of a fight, if there's a boss and there's no immunity phases, you want this up. This is kind of a damage boost too, because at least for me, because immolate's tied to my, shard generation. Some classes it's just a flat damage, but that's kind of a part of your damage, right? So that might be one small area that you can look at to increase your damage. Um, there's also, let's see. So damage taken is another key thing. Okay. So, you can look at yourself to see what you took damage from. There's going to be things that are avoidable, and there's going to be things that are be unavoidable. Obsidian skin is unavoidable for this particular fight. Consuming. So I is my corruption thing, right? So took some damage from that. That's not really important. Let's see. Let's look at Skitra. Just trying to find where I stood in some shit. Let's see.
Nicole says you should be able to find that on any fight. Just saying.
What?
Yeah.
What did I say?
Nothing. I was getting a dig in on Halloween.
Yeah, no, I was trying to find some. So he's got. Oh, here it is, Black Wings. So this is avoidable, right? So, he got 8 casts off over the course of the fight. It hit me once, right? That's completely avoidable, and I can look at that to improve, right? So I should not be hit by this at all. Yeah, sometimes things happen. Maybe you're out of position. Maybe you need to look at position better. Um, but this is an avoidable ability, right? So you can look at the fight and the guys and things like that to know what's good and what's bad. But if you died over the fight, you can look through and see what things damage you over the course of the fight. If half of it's avoidable, then you got something to work on. But so for me, right, if I was looking at this, I'd look at I'd spend some time thinking about this the next time we went into that fight to see, okay, how can I avoid that? Am I too far back of the boss to where I can't avoid the cone, to get rid of it? Obsidian Skin's ability that kind of comes through, so, normally I'd look at this, it's kind of unavoidable, right? It's a healer mechanic, but it's also a DPS mechanic because we have personals, right? So, over the course of that, I look to use personals as I'm pushing out the damage because it'll help the healers out or my self heals, right? So, I'll use my death coil and my lockstone if I start to go, around like 20% health to kind of help the healers out, right? So, because maybe when I hit 20%, the next chaos bolt will kill me because they're focused on somebody else, right? So those are the kinds of things I think about during these big damage windows, right? So as a DPS, right, we don't always have to rely on the healers. We can kind of use our toolkits to kind of help us through things, right? So for demon hunters, darkness kind of helps with that area to kind of avoid that, right? So here's kind of some more damage spikes, right? So obsidian skins most of it, right? So that's so that kind of helps, right? So making sure that we kind of help the healers out because when we're low geared, right, there's going to be more damage. We're not going to have a lot of stamina, right? During a new raid tier, we're going to be slightly under geared, and this is kind of where we need to look at to help the healers out. Healing, so you can see for yourself, what kinds of things healed you. So, well, not death coil, it's mortal coil, but I used it twice, and most of the time it's been during those huge damage windows. Soul leech is my passive ability that kind of helps me out a little bit. Chaotic energies is my mastery. That's more RNG, right? So, that gives me some absorb. Leeches, there too. Lethal strikes heals you too. Lucid dreams has a heal. But these are kinds of things. So, if you get really low, you can kind of look to help yourself out. Buffs. So buffs kind of talk about some of the things you get over the fight, right? So you can see heroism, right? Grimoire supremacy is a buff for me because it buffs my damage. So you can kind of see that I lined it up, with the time warp, right, to maximize my damage, right? So if this is tied to my infernal, so when my infernal's down, like each chaos bolt's increasing damage, for the next chaos bolt. So the more chaos bolts I can throw out in this damage window, with supremacy up, right, the better my DPS is going to be. Rolling Havoc's a passive. Same thing with Dark Soul instability, right? So these two should be pretty much tied to each other. So these are kind of my cooldowns, right? My buffs and things like that. So, this kind of helps you line things up, to increase your damage. Flask is not important. That's not important. Some of these things are, they're consumables and things like that. Memory of Lucid Dreams is a good one. That's a cooldown that pushes out, more Chaos Bolts. You got Heroism, Manifesto. So this is my on-use trinket. So I can look at that and compare it to, my damage windows. So if I'm not using my trinkets, I'm not, lining everything up. I'm not maximizing my damage, right? You can't always do it with passive, random, RNG trinkets. It's a little more difficult. You can get some weak Rs to track that, so you may be able to throw out some things, depending on what your class is to increase your damage from there. But it's a little harder to manage, and it's not, um, it's not all that important, right? Because it's just a passive thing, but you can look at that too. Maybe your class benefits from that. Um, Deaths is another good one, right? So you can look at, deaths over the fight to see what you died from, right? So, we can see, folks died from obsidian skin. Maybe, not to pick on them, but maybe, they pushed out too much damage during there. Sylgian annihilation is avoidable. Here 2 people died from that, right? So, that's something. If you notice that you died from a couple things, you can go back to the logs to see what you died from, to see if it was avoidable, to see if you can avoid it a little bit better. And it'll tell you what the ability is, right? So you can look it up in your dungeon journal, right? And you could research it, to find a guide, right? Logs isn't going to tell you what it is, right? And then you can do some homework on the side to kind of look at how you can avoid that, right? Maybe you were at a position, maybe you weren't paying attention, right? You had a brain fart, everybody does, and then you got, blown up by an ability that one shot you, right? Because you weren't in that, you weren't in the damage mitigation for it, or you know, um, when we do wipes, it's a little harder to do, but you can go fight by fight and you can see, and you can see why it killed you, right? So it's pretty, these are pretty like much one shot, right? So, these high amounts of damage. Interrupts. So while this fight's not important, you can look at interrupts over the course of the fight to see who is and who isn't interrupting, right? So, if this is more for, raid leaders to look at, right? Because they want to look at like who's doing their job and who's not doing their job, right? So if there's a fight that we have interrupts required, and we can go through and look at to see who's interrupting. Usually we'll assign it if it's required, but you can see, who's interrupting during the fight, who's not interrupting. Maybe it's a fight that requires just as many interrupts as possible, so you can kind of see, who's doing that. Same with dispels, over the course of the fight. So for this particular fight, we had, these are the dispels going out, right? This is more for the healers, but I wouldn't, um, that's something for the raid leader to look at to say, are the healers doing enough dispels and things like that, and just to kind of help them, right? Maybe they need to communicate better, and that I'm not picking on them here, but just some things to think about in general. And then this is kind of missed, I think, because of darkness. So darkness will absorb it. Uh, Resources. Uh, and then cast is just kind of gives you, we looked at it before, just, how many casts you got over the fight, right? You can look at this. So I can look at Halloween, and I can look at, you can look at another player if you want to compare them. I don't particularly like this too much because it's really hard to compare me versus the demon hunter, right? Or me versus a mage, or me versus, demonic and be like, okay, well, I pulled 50K, demonic pulled 30K, demonic is trash, right? That's not how this works, right?
Damn right he is.
But if we had if we had like a 20-man raid where we had like a couple demon hunters, we had a couple warlocks, we had a couple um, and it's relative to the class, right? So if I'm running affliction and another lock's running destro, it's not really going to work. But if I'm running destro, another lock's running destro, we want to compare damage. We can look. Oh, let me go back to that. Sorry. Compare. There we go. So if you're running with another group, right, you're running logs, even on LFR or in the raid, right, heroic, maybe we had another warlock, right? So and that warlock was pulling 20K more than me, right? So I can compare my logs to him to see what's different, right? So why is he pulling so much more damage, right? And it'll kind of give you I wish I could show you because we don't have um yeah, it's kind of hard to show, but it'll compare you to that other person, right? So it'll look at cast, it'll look at damage, it'll look at certain things for you to compare. Maybe your uptimes were lower than his, maybe you didn't push out enough chaos bolts than he did, right? So maybe he had 30 more chaos bolts than me, and a lot of that could be because I wasn't casting, I wasn't moving properly, I wasn't planning my movements and knowing what's coming from the boss, right? You know, to be able to position myself well to where, when those things happen, I'm able to react and I don't have to move as much. Because as a warlock, right, movement kills my DPS. So the less I move, the more I can turret, right, and be a glass cannon, the better off I'm going to be. If I'm constantly running around because I'm avoiding this mechanic and that mechanic, maybe I don't have to move. Maybe it's 2 steps instead of 10. Maybe I can put down my portal better to know, okay, I just teleport instead of running across there, right? Or using my lock gate, my toolkit to kind of help me lower my movement or lowering the time I need to do to move to kind of increase the DPS. But you can compare yourself to other players here. And this is really good, right? So if you're pushing, higher end content, we had a larger rig group and we had multiple classes, right? And one is really good and one's, still learning or trying to figure out how to play. This is kind of where you can compare. I Mama, you mind if I show you mind if I show Vexiona?
No,
Because
that's
there was
fine.
another hunter in there. Not to pick on you, but it'll kind of show us the comparison.
He was great. I sucked.
No. That's not
Trust
why.
me.
That's not why I was doing it. Let's go to that parse.
He's gonna show both hunters and compare
Right.
two hunters.
And he was great because I did this. I looked at him because he was great and I sucked. So it's like, okay, what can we do?
I just because there was 2 hunters in that, I just want to show it. I'd show me, but there was no other warlock, and the warlocks we ran were affliction,
No, that's
so I
fine.
can't really do a good comparison.
I do what I do. There he
There's a
is,
couple in there.
Corkropolis.
We can do.
Cork was really good. No, and I think if you bring him up versus mine, because he's the one I went to look at, and I wasn't using Beast Cleave. until I saw, if you go back to his, for example,
Hmm.
um, he, not on this screen, but where it was showing the damage done by each. Beastcleave was his biggest damager. And I was like, well, crap, I wasn't using it because I was told not to. So
Yeah.
it
So
changed my play.
right, but look at so here's the comparison, right? So you could look at your agility versus his. He's running a little lower. Stamina wise, you guys are about the same. Crit, he's a little higher. Haste, he's about um, 2,500 more than you, or 1,500 more than you.
Oh wow.
Bad mess, right? So this might be a factor, right? So
Right,
the haste might be a thing to help you improve, right? So
right.
at this haste levels, maybe the dots have some breakpoints to where they're ticking more, right?
Hmm.
So I know for me, for warlocks, right? My dot has a haste breakpoint at some point, right, where you get an extra tick inside the 10 seconds that it lasts. Versatility, he's got a little less, you got a little more. I don't think that's important, but the biggest gap here is the haste. So maybe that's a factor to where getting up to this haste, it lowers your globals to where you can cast faster, push out more damage, right?
Right.
Um, here's the talents, right? So, or the talents and essence powers, right? So, you chose Chimera Shot. He had one with the pack. You chose Camouflage. I think these are
Those
um,
aren't lined up right because I have natural mending on mine.
okay. But this will kind of compare, um, you know, he's got blood soaked, so maybe that's a damage increase. You got
Right.
lifeblood, right? So, this will kind of compare some talents between you and the other player.
Well, and some
Um,
of them aren't just talents. They're like that lifeblood, I think, that
Yeah,
Shard
Azerite.
saw.
Yeah, this is Azerite powers, right? So
Yeah.
this is talents and Azerite, right?
Right.
So he was running Strive, Focus, Visions, Lethal Strikes, and Blood Soaked.
Right.
You ran, and maybe maybe these are more optimal, right, than these ones.
Right.
And this is something that you'll have to play with, right? But this will kind of close the gap a little bit, right? And maybe he knows some things that we don't, right? On how to, what the best build is and things like that. Azure powers, um, they look pretty close, right? I don't think he's got 3 Dance with Death. I'm assuming that's probably your best one.
Yeah.
Um, Dire Consequences, Siphon Blood, and it might be a best in slack gear. I mean, here's his gear, right? So you can compare his gear to your gear to see what he's running. And looks like he's got some better trinkets than maybe you do, maybe
Yeah, my
Torm, maybe
trinkets suck. Yeah.
yeah. So Vita Charge, is probably maybe a better trinket versus but overall, I mean, you guys are pretty close in item level, right? There's not a big gap. When there's a big gap, that could be part of it too. That could be one part of the equation to where you look at the item level compared to him and say, okay, I'm at 468 and he's at 480, right? That's a 10 item level difference. There's going to be a big damage disparity.
Go down to damage done by ability, though. That's where I
Right,
found was the biggest difference because
right,
Beastcleave was at the top of his,
right. So
and
he's
Beastcleave was way down on mine.
right. So what he's doing, and I'll tell you right now what he's doing. So he's using Beast Cleave for cleave, right? So when all those ads are coming out, right, and he's focusing the ads, he's running this to pump out some damage,
Right.
right? I mean, that was like 9.3 million, right?
Right.
That was his biggest damage increase. So, that's kind of where he's going with it,
Right.
versus, your setup, right? Cream was your biggest ability, but this will kind of give you, okay, maybe I need to, um, change my approach to the fight, right? Maybe
Right.
I need to, and you can go into the specific log to look at, if you guys are like about the same as far as your damage, right? So if I looked at other warlocks, right, if it was me and another Destrolock, it would look like, Chaos Bolt, probably Infernal, maybe Incinerate is there, immolates there, right? So, and then it's just me comparing how many casts, right? So maybe he got 10 chaos bolts off, right, versus my 5. Maybe his chaos bolts hit harder, and that might be a gear thing, right? So if his chaos bolts hitting for, um, you know, 50k and my chaos bolts hitting for 30k, maybe it's a spell power issue, right? Maybe I'm not, maybe I don't have the spell power trinket, or maybe my gear's a little bad to where I need some more intellect to push out the spell power. If it's number of casts, it might be a haste thing. It might be a movement thing. So there's some factors to think about there. Keep going down, and then damage taken by ability. So you can compare, what you took damage from. You can see, when you guys died as well. So this kind of gives you a nice comparison to other players in the raid to look at how you stack up against them, right? It's somewhat of a competition thing, but it's kind of like a healthy competition, right? So
Right.
you want to help the other player out, right? So if officers are looking at logs, they're going to look at these and say, okay, Hallowyn, you pulled 30k, but this guy pulled 50k. Well, let's see why, right? So what did you do? What could you have done better to kind of get to where he's at, right? Is it a gear thing, right? Is it and you always want it to be a gear thing, right? So you never want it to be uh, an ability thing, right? A Right, and what I mean by that is the damage, right? So these are the choices he made versus the choices you made. So, maybe the next time we get to that fight, you can make some of the same choices, increase your damage. Um,
Right.
you know, but if you guys are stacking up the same thing by ability, right? So if you looked at his and his lined up with you, then it's a maybe it's a gear thing and a position thing, and you can go look at your position. um, so I'll show you the replay, right? So this is a pretty cool feature. So this will actually show. Um, it's not all, it's not 100% great, right? Because it's kind of dots, but you can kind of go through, and you can see everybody, right? So here's me, right? You can see where we're all at, and I can look to see how much I moved to the fight, right? So am I, if this is moving around a lot, right? If it's big swings, then I'm moving too much, right? So to avoid the damage, right? So those movements are because we're dropping the shit, right? So that's the stuff we're dropping, right? I forget what the ability's called, but and you can kind of see people's health bars down at the bottom right corner. See Nacho going out, demonic going out. You can see people, but I'm pretty much standing still as much as I can, aside from when the boss needs to move positioning, or ads come out because I need to move a little closer to get to them. um, I'm trying to stay still as much as possible. I'm not moving at all. um, and then over the course of this, you'll see the breath come out, and when we move from side to side, and even then you want to try to avoid moving as much as possible. This is the boss. You can see life's behind him. um, I think he's that might be Phil that's tanking him. But you can kind of see, well, here he goes up for the breath attack, right? So, this is when they're coming down, right? So we need to move here because he's going mid. Um, you know, and then maybe here we could have, you guys could have, it might be a call out thing where you react a little bit better. And it might be just, between the raid and yourself to try to stay with the group, because when you're back there, you're out of range, right? So that's a DPS loss. Not to pick on you. So he goes back, and that's the name of this game, right? To try to minimize, your movement as much as possible. I think for hunters, you guys can cast on the move. For me, I can't. The only movement casting ability I have is conflag, but unfortunately, it's part of my rotation, so it's not always going to be up. But I try to position myself to where I don't have to move as much, to try to maximize my damage. There I probably was in front of the boss to where I need to move behind. I'm moving to the ads. I got to get in range of them to hit them. But once I'm in range, right, I'm not trying to move around too much. Um, but this is a cool feature to kind of see, your positioning throughout the fight, to kind of help you out with that movement and, trying to, position yourself, and learning the fight is key, right? Knowing the fight, knowing when things are going to come out. That's where your DBM comes into play, watching watching the timers a little bit. I use big wigs because I don't like all that information the DBM throws at me. I just need to know when the boss abilities are coming out, to kind of, plan a little bit, right? So you're planning your movements. So I know we're at the top of the hour. So, um, and honestly, there's some more shit in here that we can get into, that is really useful, right? So, one, you can look at, so just to kind of summarize, you can look at, what other people are doing, right? You can compare yourself to other players in the raid, to look at. You can go to, other players to see what they're bringing to the fight. You can actually go to, so let me do one more thing. Go to one more thing. Show you guys one last thing. So Hive Mind, it took us 619. So back to your question, because I don't know if I answered it, quite well. So let's go to Nyalotha. Let's go to classes, Warlock, Destruction. Let's set this to Heroic. So the question you had in the beginning is what do I look at to see how I can improve my damage? So Skitcher, I think, not Skitcher, but the council fight I did, was Hive Mind. I did 79k. Um, Heroic. Sorry, I'm running over. So if you guys give me like 10 more minutes, I'll show you this one last thing. Um, Hive Mind. I don't know why it's not doing it. Give me 1 sec. Come on. I don't know why this is locking up on me. Let's do it this way. This is what's locking up on me. Yeah, sometimes these ads running in the background messes with shit. Come on. Oh, that's nice. There we go. One heroic. Almost there.
Hello, I'm back again.
Look,
Oh, we crowded today.
he's doing his Warcraft logs.
Ah,
Yep, and it's not working with me too well. I know this is painful to watch, but I just want to show this last thing, because you can query these things to find. Obviously, we're not killing this stuff in like 30 seconds, right? We're not killing it in 45 seconds. This gets it's pretty stupid, right? Because they're a special team that they're running, all of these things, and they're maximizing the damage to get their name on the top. But if you go, you can go down if it'll let me, and it might take a while. But so for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through it. But you can go um, define like a comparable log to the amount of time you killed it in, and then compare yourself to that person, right? So, you know, you can look at your damage versus his damage. Is it a chaos bolt thing? Um, is it a movement thing, right? It's you can see how many casts they got off versus you, and that's really going to be telling, right? So it'll tell you, basically, um, between you and that other individual, some performance things you can work on, right? So if they got off, 20 casts, you can compare yourself to other logs in the thing, right? And it's going to be hard because everybody's stupid now and they're doing end game stuff, to where they're killing it in like 2 minutes, right? So just for the sake of fun, you can see, um, here's their team. You can look at 2-minute fight. If we look at him, right? So here's the damage spike, right? So everybody's going to have a trail off. The longer the fight goes, the more trail off you're going to have. But um, if you look at it, if you compare a log to someone that's around the same time you killed the fight, you can look at what they did over the fight, right? How many casts they got off, how many chaos bolts they got off, how many immolates they got off, how many um, conflagrates they got off for the course of the fight, right? Maybe I had 15 and they had 20. And then I can look at, okay, why did I have not have that many? And maybe it's because I'm not casting it on cooldown, right? So, maybe I'm over capping. So conflagrate has 2 charges. Um, and you don't ever want to get 2 charges and sit there, right? You want to use it, roughly when it gets close. You plan to reel around, Eternal, but you want to cast conflagrate without capping, right? So those are some things you can look at. Maybe it's that piece, but this will kind of give you a way to compare yourself to other players and see how well, what are some tips that you can do to kind of get a little bit better, without having to go through, some external thing. But really, the key thing here is knowing the fights, right? If you don't know the fights, you can't plan around. You can't improve some of these things. Um, but WarcraftLogs is a great tool to research and look at what other players are doing to kind of help mirror that a little bit to improve your play style as well. So I think that's probably all I'm going to get to. There's a lot more in here, and we could spend like probably a week on and deep diving and doing some other cool stuff. There's ways to query things, specific things around what you're specifically looking for. Um, you know, Timelines kind of gives you, over the course of the fight, what happened when and where. The graph is great for, you know, just kind of the damage, peaks and valleys. You don't want to have too much, that's down here. This might be you kind of want it as smooth as possible. It's not going to always look like that, but you don't want too many dips, because it might be, you didn't move or you stopped casting. Um, so I'll stop there and see if anyone had any questions before we kind of adjourn.
No, that's a lot to take in, though.
It's a lot to take in, right? It's
Yeah.
a pretty cool feature, right?
Yeah, it is.
In most raid teams I use, right, the officers would review logs, right? And compare, look at the raid, look at what people did, talk to those individuals and say, hey, you died to this, let's look at that for next time. Hey, you took too much damage from this avoidable thing, and it's not to be mean, it's just to say, hey, look, here's some things you can improve on, right? And some of them were mean, right? Depending on what raid group you get in, but for the most part, they were pretty nice. But you can approach this in a constructive criticism way without like slamming, putting the player down and things like that. But just to kind of work with them, if someone is struggling in the raid because they're dying a lot or they're not putting out enough damage, the officers can kind of look at these to look at what other players are doing to help them, pointing them in the right direction. Um, and little things like that can help the player out, right? And then the player themselves can go in here and look at, it should be, everybody has their, accountability, right? What they do, and look at this and see what they can do to do better. There's always something you can take away to do better, right? Things happen over the course of the fight. Everybody makes mistakes, and you try to improve upon those things because that's really going to help you push higher end content, push, you know, getting bosses down quicker. Um, is understanding, what you bring to the fight. Maybe doing some research on what some other players are doing. So that's all I got. Hopefully this was helpful in some way.
Yeah, it was. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Nice.
Great. Oh, that's a good idea.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.